I used to think my life was idyllic. From the outside, I had everything: a stable career, a loving husband, a sweet little girl, and a close-knit family. People would compliment the way I balanced it all, as though I had some secret formula. But isn't that how it always goes? The most carefully arranged lives often hide the messiest truths. If you told me a year ago that my world would unravel at the hands of my sister and my husband, I would have laughed. Evelyn was the free spirit of the family, the one who dyed her hair in every shade of rebellion and scoffed at my picket fence dreams. Daniel, on the other hand, was my anchor, the one who made me believe in stability after a childhood filled with chaos. Together, they represented two sides of my life I never imagined would collide. Looking back, the signs were there, the lingering glances, the jokes that seemed just a bit too intimate. But hindsight is a cruel companion, isn't it? It tricks you into thinking you should have seen it all along. The days leading up to my discovery were a study in subtlety. At first, I ignored the signs, brushing them off as coincidences. But little things started to nag at me, like how Evelyn's visits became more frequent, or how Daniel would suddenly look away when I entered the room. Once, I caught them laughing in the kitchen over some inside joke I wasn't privy to. And the sharp pang of exclusion twisted in my chest. But Evelyn had always been the charming one, the center of every gathering. The one who could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the room. Still, something felt off. Daniel, who normally couldn't stop talking about his day, had grown distant. He started staying late at work more often. And when he was home, he spent hours locked in his office. Deadlines, he'd say, barely looking up. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him for a while. But doubt is like a weed. Once it takes root, it spreads, no matter how hard you try to ignore it. I started noticing the way Evelyn lingered after family dinners. How Daniel would always offer to walk her to her car. The way her hand would brush his arm as they said goodbye. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Evelyn had always been touchy. Her affection spilling over like wine from a too full glass. But it wasn't just the touches. It was the way Daniel responded, subtle, almost imperceptible, but there, a softening in his posture, a look in his eyes that wasn't meant for me. The turning point came one Friday evening. I was cleaning the living room when I found a receipt on the coffee table. It was for an expensive Italian restaurant, a place Daniel and I had always talked about trying but never had. The date on the receipt was from a night he had claimed to be working late. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself it was for a work event, but the doubt gnawed at me, relentless. That night, I lay awake next to Daniel, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was slow and even, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I wanted to shake him awake, demand answers, but instead, I stayed silent, my mind racing with every possible explanation, each one more painful than the last. When I found the message, it was as though time stopped. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the thread, each word a dagger to my chest. Can't stop thinking about last night. You're the only one who understands me. Wish I could see you again tonight. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My throat tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I clutched the phone to my chest, as though trying to contain the hurt that threatened to spill over. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but all I could do was sit there, paralyzed by the weight of the betrayal. In that moment, I wasn't just a wife betrayed by her husband. I was a sister betrayed by someone I had loved and trusted my entire life. Evelyn, who used to braid my hair when we were kids. Evelyn, who held my hand at my wedding and whispered, "You've got a good one." Evelyn, who had always been my opposite but never my enemy until now. I spent the next few days in a haze, barely functioning. I went through the motions of motherhood, work, and life, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in an endless loop of what ifs. What if I had confronted them sooner? What if I had been a better wife? A better sister? What if I could somehow turn back time and fix everything? Family dinners had always been a tradition, a way for us to stay connected despite our busy lives. This one felt different from the start. I could barely eat, my stomach churning with a toxic mix of anger and dread. Evelyn sat across from me, chatting animatedly with our mother, completely unaware of what was coming. Daniel sat beside me, his hand brushing mine as though everything was fine. The audacity of it all made me want to scream. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. "Evelyn, Daniel," I said, setting down my fork, "why don't you tell everyone what you've been doing behind my back?" The room fell silent. Evelyn's smile froze, her eyes darting to Daniel. He shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. What are you talking about? Evelyn asked, her voice laced with faux innocence. But I saw the panic in her eyes. Don't play dumb, I said, my voice sharper now. I saw the messages. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Evelyn looked at him, then back at me. For a moment, it was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. And then, like a thunderclap, Gloria's laughter broke the tension. At first, I thought she was in shock. But the longer she laughed, the more I realized it wasn't just nervous hysteria. She was genuinely amused. What's so funny? I snapped, my anger now directed at her. Gloria wiped her eyes, still chuckling. Oh, Clara, she said, shaking her head, you think this is the first time something like this has happened in this family? Let me tell you a story. Gloria's story came tumbling out in a rush of words, her voice a mix of humor and regret. She spoke of her affair with a man she had met during her darkest days, a time when her marriage to my father was more about endurance than love. She described how the affair had given her a sense of escape, a fleeting moment of joy in an otherwise suffocating life. But the fallout, she said, was devastating. My father found out, and though they stayed together, the trust was never the same. Her revelation left me reeling. I had always seen my parents as a united front, their marriage a model of resilience. To learn that they, too, had been fractured by betrayal felt like a cruel twist of fate. You're all so busy blaming each other, Gloria said, her tone almost wistful, but this is bigger than just you. It's a cycle, one that started long before any of us. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down, I knew there was truth in her words. Our family had always been a tapestry of secrets and half-truths, each generation weaving its own thread of dysfunction. The drive home after the family dinner was suffocating. I didn't say a word to Daniel as he drove. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that made it hard to even breathe. I kept replaying Gloria's laughter in my mind, her words about cycles and patterns. It was infuriating. She had treated the revelation of my husband's affair with my sister as some inevitable family drama, a dark comedy we were all doomed to perform. But was she wrong? That was the question gnawing at me. I had spent years watching my parents' strained marriage, seeing the quiet silences and sharp looks they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. I had told myself my marriage would be different, that I would never let resentment fester the way they did. And yet, here I was living a nightmare that felt eerily familiar. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat on the edge of my mattress and stared at the empty side of the bed where Daniel usually slept. He had gone to the guest room without a word, as though he knew better than to push me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Evelyn's betrayal felt personal, like a knife to the heart. I had always been the one to look out for her, to clean up her messes and defend her to anyone who dared criticize her. She was my sister, my blood. How could she do this to me? And Daniel, God, where did I even begin? He wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, my confidant, the father of my child. I thought I knew him better than anyone. But now I realized how naive I had been. He had lied to me for months, maybe longer. Had I ever truly known him at all? Gloria's revelation only added another layer of complexity to my pain. She had framed her own affair as a symptom of a broken marriage, an act of rebellion against a life she felt trapped in. Was that what Evelyn and Daniel were doing, seeking escape from their own unhappiness? Or was it something more selfish? Something darker? I wanted answers, but the truth was, no explanation could undo the damage they had done. The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't stay, not with Daniel, not in the house we had built together, not in the shadow of the life we had shared. I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for Lily and me, called my mother to let her know we were coming, and left without telling Daniel. As I drove to Gloria's house, my hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Lily sat quietly in the backseat, sensing the tension but too young to understand what was happening. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, my heart breaking at the thought of how this would affect her. She deserved better than this. She deserved better than me. Gloria greeted me at the door with a knowing look, as though she had been expecting this. She didn't say much, just wrapped me in a hug and led me inside. For once, I didn't resent her dark humor or her habit of brushing things off. I just needed someone to be there, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. The days that followed were a blur of anger, grief, and confusion. I spent hours replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for clues I might have missed. Had Daniel always been this way? Had Evelyn always been capable of such betrayal? Or had I been blind, too caught up in the fantasy of a perfect life to see the cracks. Gloria tried to comfort me in her own way, sharing stories of her own struggles and the mistakes she had made. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to hear about her affair or how she had managed to move on. It felt like she was trying to minimize what had happened to me, to lump my pain into some broader narrative of family dysfunction. But over time, her stories started to make sense. She wasn't excusing Evelyn or Daniel, nor was she trying to justify her own actions. She was showing me that pain wasn't unique. That betrayal wasn't the end of the world. It was a wound, yes, but one that could heal if I let it. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I found myself drawn to the small art studio Gloria had set up in her basement. Evelyn had always been the artist in the family, but I had dabbled in painting as a teenager. I hadn't picked up a brush in years, but something about the smell of paint and the blank canvas called to me. I started painting that night, letting the colors flow freely across the canvas. It wasn't about creating something beautiful, it was about releasing the emotions I had been holding inside. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, it all poured out of me, stroke by stroke. It became my therapy. Each night, after Lily was asleep, I would retreat to the studio and paint until my hands ached. Slowly, the tightness in my chest began to ease. I started to feel like myself again, not the wife or the sister or the daughter, but me, Clara. Months later, during one of our late-night talks, Gloria shared one last secret with me. Her affair, she confessed, hadn't been just a mistake born of desperation. It had been a deliberate choice, a way to reclaim her autonomy after years of emotional abuse from my father. She didn't tell me this to excuse her actions but to show me that life was complicated, that people were messy and flawed. Her words hit me hard. For so long, I had seen her as the villain in my childhood, the one who had caused my father so much pain. But now, I saw her as a survivor, someone who had done what she needed to do to survive. It didn't justify her actions, but it made me understand her in a way I never had before. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but it came. I forgave Daniel and Evelyn, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger that was consuming me. I didn't reconcile with them, I wasn't ready for that, but I stopped letting their betrayal define me. I found a small townhouse for Lily and me, a place where we could start fresh. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. Piece by piece, I went back to work, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. But most importantly, I focused on being the best mother I could be for Lily. In the end, I realized Gloria was right. Life is messy, and people are imperfect, but even in the midst of heartbreak, there is hope, and that hope is what carried me forward.